Welcome to Super Self. In today's video, I will share with you how I made this beautiful bonsai tree. So without further ado, let's get right into it. For this project, we're going to use a hot glue gun with some hot glue, acrylic paint, some moldable wire, optionally gloss varnish, some pliers, and some brushes. You would also need something to use as a pot. It could be the lid of a mouthwash, for example, here, a miniature pot, or anything that will resemble this shape. The size of it will depend on how big your project will be. Next, we will need a display stand, and I'm using this ribbon stand as an example. I also had these little columns for my other projects, and I found also this bigger pot that it can also serve as a display stand. And of course, if you have two size pots, then maybe you can use the bigger one actually as the stand. I found around this cute little decoration where I could take out the extra pieces or use it actually as it is and maybe create something different. But it's up to you. For the structure of the branches, we're going to use sea moss, and for the foliage, we're going to use this artificial moss, or you can also use dry moss. I found these threads of artificial moss that I believe are going to help the best for this project. Before we get started, let's talk about the inspiration behind this project. I really like these cascade bonsais. Bonsais in generally are trying to emulate what we see in nature. I picked this left image just to get an idea, and when put it into proportion, I kind of decided that I wanted to have around this height. For my project, it is around 19 centimeters or 3.5 inches. You will have to keep in mind different measurements, like the display table. I use as a reference these two here, and I think are very cute. And you also need to consider the base or the pot. How big is it going to be? This is my reference for this project. I wanted to take it even further, and I will make a Kintsugi pot design for this project. You also need to consider, of course, the height of the trunk. Because I'm a little bit nerdy, I decided to actually design one on my own in Blender, as well as a display table. However, you can always use some of the ideas we explored at the beginning. So I went ahead and 3D printed these designs, and I think they turned out fabulous. For the first step, we are going to customize our display. So I 3D printed it. I am going to be using an acrylic marker just because this is the color that I wanted to use for this piece. This section is to ensure that we are using our reference photos and customizing it as we want. So feel free to do that with whatever material you decide to use or whatever shape you are going to be having for your stand. In my case, I wanted to make a little design also on the top. It won't be that visible, but I thought it would be a cute idea to add some extra customizations to this project. For this part, I'm just using regular markers to add some shades, to add some dimension, and I think I actually like pretty much how it turned out in the end. Let's move to the centerpiece, which is preparing the pot. I 3D printed mine, but you can use anything that you have around the house that has a similar shape of high pot or base. I'm very fond of this deep blue, royal blue color that I often see in bonsai pots. So I decided to go with a similar color, and I found this beautiful blue already in my stash. So I decided to go with it, and I'm doing a little dégradé from darker at the bottom and lighter at the top. To turn it into a Kintsugi pot, I took some gold paint and first added a golden edge just to elevate a little bit the overall look, and I think this is what I've seen in the pots very often, that the edge is golden. In case you didn't know, Kintsugi is the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery by mending the areas of breakage with urushi lacquer, dusted or mixed with powdered gold. Here you can see in the reference photos how the gold and blue looks like after the restoration. Of course, I'm not going to break this pot, but I am creating that effect by adding some lines into the base to simulate how would it look like if it actually had broken and been repaired. I wasn't really sure how far to go with this, to be honest, but I thought if it is really broken, then we will have multiple pieces in multiple areas. So I decided to do this effect of lightning in the night all around the whole base, because I guess it will make sense that when it's broken everywhere, especially considering this shape and how I started. I'm very happy how this turned out, and yeah, it really looks like a stormy night, I'll say. Now moving on, we will do this metal structure using the moldable wires, and I just wanted to get you an idea of what the final piece will look like. Here I have 3 wires with different thickness, and I guess it will depend on the size of the project you're gonna do. The smaller it will be, the thinner the wire should be for better proportions. In my case, because it's a little bit bigger what I want to achieve, I will use the thicker wire that I have. We want to start by measuring, going back and forth before we make the first cut of how big it's going to be, what shape more or less it should have, so that we are kind of sure. And after that, you can straighten it up, and then we're going to cut a few pieces. And I would also recommend that you go back to look at your reference photo. This will help you identify how many branches or so you will need. In my case, I cut 4 long pieces and 3 smaller ones, because not all should have the same length, especially because I want to keep this proportion around. What we're going to do is we're going to take some of the long and the small ones, not all of them at once, and we're going to start twisting them together. We're going to leave a little piece at what the bottom of this is going to be, because from that we're going to take the roots of the bonsai. The top part is going to be turned into different branches. Once you can see that they are a little bit stuck together, you can start going back and twisting it slightly towards the shape that you want to achieve. And again, you should have some reference photos around. This will help you more or less decide on what shape this tree is going to take. There is no perfect shape, there is no right shape. Bonsai trees have multiple shapes and sizes, so this will depend on what you want to achieve. Here what I'm doing is adding new or the remaining pieces of wire and twisting them around to create more thickness at the bottom, but also to ensure that I have enough branches throughout the whole tree and not just at the end. We're also doing the shorter parts to ensure that we have a taper at the beginning of a tree. That means that the trunk at the bottom is thicker. I also really like to have exposed roots. This reminds me of my childhood a bit, so this is why I like it. And I twisted the ends just to make sure that those roots are visible. The next step is to cover fully with the hot glue the structure that we just built. And this doesn't need to be perfect either. When you're growing bonsai, more often than not, you will need to be trimming different parts of the branches, especially at the bottom, so this will create a bulkier look there, and sometimes you have little bumps and little holes. So if you do not cover up everything in a perfect smooth way, it would actually give more dimension and more personality to this project. Make sure to always go back and forth to see that it's actually going in the direction that you want. And if something is not there or is not fitting properly, you can always just tweak the wire still a little bit with your pliers. And once you're happy with how it turned out, you can go into painting. I have mixed some colors to create a nice shade of brown that I like. Also, again, trees have different bark colors, so you can pick and choose any color that you would like. Just make sure that you have enough coverage. To create a little extra dimension, I am going to use a little black paint to go over some holes and some bumps into the tree, just to again go back to this reference photo where you can see there are some spots there. Maybe some squirrels could live there, in like if the tree was real size or so. So just go around with your black paint, creating some shades and tones in different areas. It doesn't need to be perfect. Once again, when it's all put together, it will look really good. And I love how all of this is already getting shape, and now we can move on to adding some branches. For working with scale in general, it is very important to keep the proportions, and we are going to use some dry sea moss for adding the branches, because these have this already shape of mini trees, and it really will help bring this together in a nice way. I bought the sea moss for different projects as well. You don't have to buy so much like I did, but you are free to do as much as you need. I mean, you can also play with making trees with this same technique, maybe bigger or so. That will be up to you. So after I have selected some pieces that I think it will help achieve the look that I want, I'm going to start placing them as per my reference photo or what I look that I want to achieve. So again, you should always keep your reference photos close by so you have an idea of where the right placements will go. And it is as simple as just adding some hot glue and start putting pieces together. I will recommend that you start from the bottom and then go up. And if you are already seeing much bulk into adding these things, you can also use a pair of tweezers to start placing them in the right areas and prevent misplacing others that you've already glued on. Here I'm working my way up through the branches and adding some hot glue into them. I particularly notice that you don't really see this transparent glue after that, so you don't have to go back there with paint or anything. It will be okay. And once you're happy with how it turns out, I will suggest that you go with a little layer of green paint to set up a foundation for our next step. One of the final steps then is adding the foliage. As I said, I use these artificial moss strings. They come in a little ball. They are also used for many things. They're just threads of polyester, I believe. And what we're gonna do is add them as foliage. What I decided to do is just start placing them around. Because of all the different shapes that the sea moss have, these things basically just get entangled into it, and you don't have to worry or glue them or anything. It will be very similar if you use dried moss, basically that one that they sell already colored around Eastern. You can use that one too, or you can also grind some sponges and color that sponge. Then this will help you create a similar texture to what you are seeing here. I will recommend that you use this artificial foliage though. It is very cheap to find. You can find it easily on Amazon or other platforms, arts and crafts store. You just place it around all over the little branches that we've created, and you can arrange also with the tweezers the placements in case they are getting entangled or so, or they are not in the right place where you want them to be. Now I think this is looking fantastic and I am very happy how it's turning out. Now it's time to bring all of it together. So we're gonna bring back our little pot. I also collected some pebbles and some dry leaves, and this is just to add some weight to the pot because our piece now is a little bit heavier, and this will help with the counterbalance. I'm adding some of these dry leaves to still keep it with the natural tones and maybe fill in a little bit the gaps that are going on there. I mean, you can also just use paper and paint it. It's really not a big deal, but it's of course up to you. Now I am going back and testing that this is actually working. And of course, if it needs a little bit of adjustments, this is the time for you to do that. So now that I know where I want this to be placed, we're going to add some hot glue to the structure, and we're going to glue the tree in place just to make sure that it doesn't move on later on because of the counterweight. As I said, it is important that it stays stable. So with the tree being more stable, I added a little fillers into the gaps, but I also wanted to keep the roots showing, as I said, if you remember. I'm adding here some extra of the dry leaves, and with the tweezers I'm pushing them in. They are creating also this effect of soil or pit. I actually quite like it, and I'm adding also some strings of the fake moss or the artificial moss so that it also brings a more natural look to it all. And here you have it. I decided to add this extra little shoot coming out of the bottom of the tree, which I think it also adds a little extra dimension. And yeah, I think it looks really cute, and also some extra green. It looks exactly how I wanted it to look. Let's have a closer look to the Cascade bonsai tree standing on a deep blue Kintsugi pot and on this beautiful display stand. I hope you like this video, and if you do so, please, I will appreciate the thumbs up, and maybe you can subscribe to my channel so you can stay tuned to any other tutorial like this one. If you decide to make one of these, make sure to tag me on the social media. Here are some images of this beautiful bonsai in a diorama. I hope you enjoy, and see you on the next video.